In the northern highlands of Ethiopia, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of the ancient city of Axum, there is a plateau that does not appear on any tourist map, that is not accessible by any road that appears in any publicly available geographic survey, and that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained under a form of spiritual restriction for longer than any living person can account for with documentary evidence. The restriction is not a fence. It is not a government boundary. It is a designation maintained by the Church itself, enforced not through physical barrier, but through the kind of institutional consensus that makes a place effectively unreachable without the cooperation of the people who know how to reach it. No Western researcher has documented having visited this plateau. The Ethiopian scholars who know of its existence through the Church's internal geographical tradition do not discuss it in published work. It appears in one place in the available documentary record. A footnote in an unpublished field report from an archaeological survey conducted in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia between 1982 and 1986. A survey funded by a European institution, whose name does not appear in any subsequent publication related to that survey, a survey whose lead researcher filed a preliminary report that referenced the plateau's location and then filed no further reports. A survey that the funding institution subsequently removed from its list of completed research projects without explanation. The plateau is referenced in that footnote with a phrase that the field report's author borrowed from the local oral tradition. The phrase, translated from the Tigrinya language spoken in that region, means the place where the waiting is kept. The Book of Enoch, in chapter 20, 5 of the Ge'ez manuscript preserved at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, describes a tree. Not a symbolic tree, a specific tree, in a specific location, under specific conditions of guardianship, waiting for a specific moment at the end of history, when it will be moved from where it currently stands to a different location, where it will serve a function that the text describes in language that no Western translation has ever rendered with full precision that function. That moment, that tree, and the location the text gives for where it currently stands, points, with the kind of geographical specificity that Dr. Michael Knibb of King's College London once called, inconsistent with symbolic literature, to a plateau in northern Ethiopia that does not appear on any tourist map and that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained under spiritual restriction for longer than anyone can document. The Council of Laodicea removed the Book of Enoch from Christian scripture in 364 CE. The stated reason was content describing the structure of heaven in ways reserved for God alone. But the passage in chapter 25 was not primarily a passage about heaven. It was a passage about the earth, about a specific place on the earth where something specific was being kept, under specific guardianship, for a specific future use. A passage about the earth that gives geographical information that can be checked. That is a different kind of threat than a passage about heaven. Heaven cannot be surveyed. A location on the earth can be, and a text that gives the location of something that the Church's own eschatological tradition holds to be a central element of the events at the end of history, is a text that, if accurate, places knowledge in the hands of ordinary readers that the institutional Church has never been prepared to share. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, excluded Enoch from the canon and in his preface described the tree passage, specifically as containing prophetic material about the end of the age that he characterized as premature disclosure. Premature disclosure, not false prophecy. Not confused cosmology premature. The information in the passage was, in Jerome's assessment, accurate enough to be dangerous and specific enough to be actionable. His concern was not that people would read false information. His concern was that people would read true information before the institutional structure was prepared for the consequences of that truth being widely known. Chapter 25 of the Book of Enoch in its Ge'ez form begins with Enoch being taken by the angel Uriel to a mountain in the far north. The text uses a directional system that, as Dr. Michael Knibb noted in his 1978 Oxford translation, employs compass directions and terrain features that suggest geographical specificity rather than symbolic landscape. The mountain Uriel shows Enoch is described in terms that place it within a range of highlands extending from the north toward the east, with a valley to the west and a water source at its base that the Ge'ez describes as a spring flowing without interruption. These are not metaphorical features. They are the features a surveyor would record, and the standard R.H. Charles translation of 1906 renders this passage in 3 sentences. 3 sentences for a passage that occupies 11 verses in the complete G.S. text. The compression in Charles's edition of the tree passage follows the same pattern as his compression of the 4th being passage in chapter 14, 3 sentences. For 11 verses, the same ratio, the same editorial hand, making the same decision about what ordinary readers needed to access. What the 11 verses contain in the full G.S. text is a description of a tree that Enoch sees on the mountain to which Uriel has taken him. The description begins with the tree's appearance. The G.S. uses a word for its form that appears elsewhere in the manuscript only in descriptions of things that are simultaneously singular and multiple. A form that is unified at its visible surface, but contains within it a complexity that the visible surface does not fully express. The tree appears to be one thing. The G.S. implies it is more than one thing expressed through the form of a single thing. Its fragrance, which Enoch describes in the next verse, is described with the word the G.S. uses elsewhere, to describe the quality of something that cannot be fully perceived by a single sense. Something that reaches past the sense attempting to perceive it into a register that sense cannot fully access. Enoch smells the tree, and the smell is not contained by the act of smelling. It exceeds the capacity of the sense to which it presents itself. The tree's leaves are described as always present, not seasonal, not dependent on conditions, simply always there in a state of continuous and unvarying completeness. And its fruit, which Uriel tells Enoch the tree currently bears but does not release, is described with the G.S. word for something that has reached the state it was designed to reach and is being held in that state. Not ripening further, not decaying, simply maintained at the point of completion without release. The fruit is complete and held, not for now. For the moment the text describes next, Uriel tells Enoch directly what the tree is for. The G.S. records the angel's words in a construction that the 1983 Oxford translation by Dr. Ephraim Isaac renders as, "This tree will be given to the righteous and the holy ones. The tree's fruit will give life to the chosen. It will be planted toward the north in a holy place beside the house of the Lord." This is the version that appears in the English scholarly editions. The version that appears in the complete G.E.'s manuscript at Axum contains additional material in this passage that Dr. Isaac acknowledged in a footnote to his 1983 translation, noting that the G.S. text at this point includes geographical specificity that he had rendered in abbreviated form in the interest of scholarly coherence with the Aramaic fragments from Qumran. Abbreviated in the interest of scholarly coherence, the full G.S. passage does not stop with the future destination of the tree. It also describes the tree's current location. The passage that Isaac abbreviated in his 1983 edition describes where the tree is now, not only where it will be taken, it describes the terrain features of its current location. The spring at the base of the mountain, the valley to the west, the plateau above. The restriction on access maintained by beings the text calls the guardians of the waiting, and the direction from Axum, which the Jez gives in terms of distance and bearing that translate, when applied to the actual geography of northern Ethiopia, to a plateau approximately 40 kilometers northeast of the city. Dr. Isaac's decision to abbreviate this passage was not made without notice. In a 1991 interview with the journal Enoch, which publishes scholarship on the Enochic tradition, Isaac was asked directly about the geographical content of chapter 25. He stated that the full Jez text of chapter 25 contains material that he had chosen not to reproduce in his 1983 translation because it raised questions he was not in a position to answer as a scholar of ancient texts. Questions he was not in a position to answer. He did not say the material was of uncertain authenticity. He did not say it was a late scribal edition. He said he was not in a position to answer the questions it raised. An Ethiopianist who had spent decades working with the Ge'ez manuscript tradition, who had produced the definitive English translation of the text, who had been granted access to the Axum manuscripts in the years before the 1974 restriction, was not in a position to answer the questions raised by the geographical content of chapter 25. The interview does not pursue this statement. The interviewer moves to the next question. The statement sits in the journal archive, unexamined in any subsequent publication on the tree passage in Enoch 25. The Archaeological Survey of 1982 to 1986 is where the documentation becomes both more specific and more difficult to trace. The survey was documented in the field records of its lead researcher, a European archaeologist whose name appears in the preliminary report but not in any publication derived from that report, because no publication was derived from that report. The preliminary report itself was submitted to the funding institution, which at that time was identified in the survey's initial proposal documents as a research foundation affiliated with a Northern European university. The foundation's name appeared in the proposal documents. It does not appear in the preliminary report. Between the submission of the initial proposal and the submission of the preliminary report, the funding institution's name was changed in the documentation to a generic research body designation that does not correspond to any institution traceable in the public record. The preliminary report, which is available through a Freedom of Information request to the Ethiopian Ministry of Culture and Tourism because it was submitted to that ministry as part of the survey's permitting process, describes in its third section a visit to a plateau in the northern Tigray region that the lead researcher describes as consistent with the geographical description in a text he identifies only as an ancient Ethiopian source, without naming the text. The plateau, he writes, shows evidence of maintained clearance, meaning trees and brush that would naturally grow in the area have been consistently removed over an extended period, leaving a cleared space that is not the result of natural conditions. Maintained clearance. Someone has been maintaining a cleared space on a plateau in the northern Ethiopian highlands. The preliminary report's third section ends with the notation that further investigation of the plateau was not possible due to the objection of local religious authorities who were present at the site and who indicated that access was not permitted. Local religious authorities who were present at the site on a plateau that does not appear on any tourist map, in a location that the field researcher describes as consistent with an ancient Ethiopian geographical description. Waiting, in the phrase of the local oral tradition the footnote preserves, for what the waiting is kept for. The funding institution's removal of the survey from its completed research projects list was first noted in a 2009 paper by a Norwegian scholar named Dr. Astrid Bergman, who was compiling a bibliography of archaeological surveys in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, conducted between 1975 and 1995. Bergman's paper is not about Enoch. It is about the documentation of archaeological activity in northern Ethiopia during the period of the Derg military government, when access to the region was inconsistent and survey records were frequently incomplete. In a section dealing with surveys that appear in the Ethiopian Ministry of Culture and Tourism permit records, but do not appear in the publication records of their funding institutions, Bergman lists the 1982 to 1986 survey and notes in a sentence that the funding institution's removal of the survey from its records is unusual relative to the practices of comparable institutions during the same period, which typically retained completed project records, regardless of whether publications resulted, unusual relative to comparable practices. In a bibliography paper about documentation gaps in a specific regional archaeological period, the survey's removal from the funding institution's records is flagged in a sentence and not pursued. Bergman's paper has been cited 4 times in the scholarship on northern Ethiopian archaeology. None of the 4 citing papers address the specific survey she identified as anomalous. What the complete Jesus text of Enoch 25 describes, when the geographical content that Isaac abbreviated is restored and read against the actual terrain of northern Ethiopia, is a location with 4 specific features. A spring that flows without interruption at the base of a highland terrain formation, a valley to the west of the terrain formation, a plateau above the terrain formation that is maintained in a cleared state by guardians the text calls the Watchers of the Waiting, a different category from the Watchers of chapters 6 through 11, designated specifically for the function of maintaining the space where the tree currently stands, and a bearing and distance from Aksum that corresponds to the plateau referenced in the 1982 field report's footnote. 4 features: the spring, the western valley, the maintained clearing, the bearing from Aksum. The preliminary field report confirms the maintained clearing and the bearing. The spring and the western valley are features of the terrain in the area described that any topographic map of northern Ethiopia would confirm. The 4 features are present in the location the JS text describes. The field survey that reached that location was stopped by local religious authorities. The funding institution removed the survey from its records. Dr. Isaac abbreviated the passage that describes the location. The Aksum manuscripts that contain the full text have been inaccessible to Western scholars since 1974. There is one more element to this account that the available scholarship has not addressed directly. The Ge'ez text describes what happens to the tree at the moment it is moved. The text does not describe this moment as something that happens in the indeterminate future of symbolic prophecy. It describes it with the grammatical construction the Ge'ez uses throughout the manuscript to describe events that have a specific trigger condition. The tree is moved when a specific condition is met. The text describes the condition, and the condition is not a date, not a cosmic event, not a divine decision made in isolation from human history. The condition is the completion of a specific process that the Ge'ez describes as the filling of the account. The account, the Ge'ez word used here, is the same word used in the chapter 22 passage describing the four hollows of the afterlife, where the murdered dead cry out for their case to be heard, for their death to be entered into the divine accounting. The same word, the account that must be filled before the tree is moved, is the same account that the restless dead of the second hollow are crying out to complete. When the accounting of what has been done and left unresolved in the world reaches its completion, the trigger condition is met. The tree is moved. The fruit that has been held at the point of completion without release is released. And what was waiting on the plateau in the northern Ethiopian highlands, maintained by guardians the text names but that no Western translation has preserved, is no longer waiting. The guardians, the Ge'ez text names for the plateau, are not angels in the category of the watchers or the holy intercessors of the third heaven. They are described with a word that appears in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition in only one other context, in the liturgical texts of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where it designates a category of monastic guardian whose function is specifically the maintenance of a sacred space that must be kept clear and attended until a moment that the guardian's tradition describes as the appointed time. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains a monastic tradition in the highlands of northern Ethiopia that predates the formal establishment of the church in the 4th century, and that the church absorbed rather than created, incorporating a set of guardianship practices whose origin the church's own internal historical tradition traces back beyond its own founding to a period it describes simply as before the writing of what we now write. Before the writing of what we now write, a guardianship practice that predates the written records of the institution that currently maintains it, practiced at a location that the institution does not publicly identify. On a plateau that a European field survey reached in 1984 and was turned away from by local religious authorities who were already there. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Western Bible in 364 CE. The tree passage was abbreviated in the only complete English translation available to scholars. The field survey that reached the plateau was removed from the funding institution's records. The Aksum manuscripts that contain the full geographical description have been inaccessible since 1974. The preliminary field report sits in the Ethiopian Ministry of Culture and Tourism Permit Archive, its 3rd section describing a maintained clearing on a plateau where religious authorities were already present when the researchers arrived. Dr. Isaac, in a 1991 interview, said he was not in a position to answer the questions raised by the full geographical content of Chapter 25, and then the interview moved on. And on a plateau in the northern highlands of Ethiopia, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of the city where the manuscripts that describe it are kept, something is being maintained in a cleared space by guardians whose tradition of maintenance predates the written records of the institution that now continues it, waiting for the completion of an accounting that the text in the sealed church in the city 40 kilometers away says must be filled before the waiting ends. The fruit is still held at the point of completion. The account is still being filled. The tree is still there. And the waiting, as the local tradition preserved in a footnote in an unpublished field report describes it, is still being kept exactly as the text that Jerome called premature disclosure has always said it would be.